Hello and welcome to Art Show. I'm Craig Stover, and today I have with me Lisa Haun. Hey, Lisa, how are you today?
I'm good, Craig. How are you?
Very good. I had the pleasure of going through your website, and I wanted to share with the audience a few pieces of yours. You don't know what I've picked,
Ah,
but I thought these were sort of standout
hmm
pieces. And I wanted to start with this one because it's an extraordinary shot. Obviously, most people know who this is. But I loved sort of the composition of this piece. Can you remember, because this was done quite a while ago, was this just a pose that he had, or is this something that you asked him to do?
No, boy, can I remember meeting Allen Ginsberg. Yes, it's actually a great story. I used to live in the East Village, and there was some sort of major poetry festival happening on this day. And one of the publications I worked for had actually asked me to go photograph the Fugs, which is Tuli Kopperberg and Ed Sanders, who were both poets besides having the band. So I go over there and I meet one of them, and the other one isn't there yet. So he says, I think it was Ed says, Tuli's not here yet, but just hang on a couple minutes and I'll come get you. And I said, great, I'll use the time to work up the nerve to go introduce myself to Allen Ginsberg. And he looked at me and he said, are you kidding? And I said, no. And I thought, oh, what did I say? And he went, oh, come with me. And he dragged me over to Allen Ginsberg and I let out a big gulp of like, oh, holy crap.
Uh,
And Ed, who's just met me, says, this is my friend Lisa. She works for the Village Voice. She's a great photographer. She's going to take some pictures of you. Is that okay? And Alan said, sure. And I took a picture and he went, wait. And I said, I'm sorry. And he went, no, 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 let me just tidy up a little. So I took about 4 frames and just lost my cool and went, I got to go, but thank you so much.
right. Before I blow it, let me go.
Right before I blow it. Oh my God. Yeah. Major figure in American poetry. I got to go.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
such a wonderful photo. I had uh, the good fortune to see him speak up at
Oh,
UPenn
geez.
a couple of years before he passed away. But it's just an extraordinary photo, and
Oh,
I
thanks.
I love the pose, the everything, and it's almost, even if he wasn't Ginsberg, the photo itself is also
It'd be
quite
nice.
good. And
Yeah.
then I wanted to do one more older photo,
hmm
um,
Oh boy.
pre-mustache, right? Is that what I'm
I
seeing here?
think if you get in close, there's a tiny
Okay.
bit of hair over the lip, just a teeny tiny bit.
So
But yeah,
how did you meet him? Was this the
well,
same?
again, back at this time in the 80s, when I was living in New York, I worked for lots of little publications. I mean, one of my jokes is if it was headquartered in New York and went out of business owing the freelancers money, I worked for it. Just so he was doing a talk at Danceteria, and someone sent me over, and backstage at Danceteria was down in the basement. And we took a couple frames. And again, I tried not to impose too much on people that I was just wowed by and went, thank you so much.
Mhm.
And left. But boy, wow.
It's again,
He's
it's
so young.
for me,
Poor
the
guy.
photo is the fact that it's the wall, it's the
Mhm.
shadow, it's the lighting.
Right.
Again, I think if you didn't know this was John Waters, you would still like the photograph. I just thought it
Oh,
was sort of extraordinary.
thanks. Because
Um,
one of the things I really like about certain portrait photographers is there will be certain images where you look at and you think, I would love to have lunch with whoever this is. They look like they have
mhm.
stories. They look like they'd be interesting company. So thanks, because that I tried to get that
That's
across.
what I liked about your older work. Even though you did a lot of photographs with bands and other sort of famous people, it was still the photographs themselves is what always captured my eye to it. So you have quite a selection on your website, lisahaun.com. But
Yeah.
I had a tough time picking stuff, because there were so many great things that I could have chosen from. But I kind of want to do a little flash forward. I know this might
Okay.
surprise you,
Oh,
right? So
yeah.
it's a very different time in your life, but
Mm-hmm.
the quality of this photo is fantastic. I really, really enjoy this. So, uh, flash me forward. This is several years after those early
Oh,
band and
yeah.
famous people photographers. you're no longer living in New York, right? You're here
Right. I
in
came back here.
in Philadelphia. So what made you start doing these like still lifes, but still familiar kind of a thing?
Well, I'd stopped doing portraits of performers in the late, sort of around 1990. A combination of, I realized I was still living on sort of like ramen noodles, and I just wasn't going to be one of the few people who made it enough to really live off this.
Hmm.
The times had changed so much, I think partly due to MTV. When I first started photographing musicians around 1980 for all these little punk fanzines I worked for, everybody was thrilled to be doing press. And then MTV came through, and suddenly everything got bigger, and people's appearances got a lot more. Um, oh, I don't know what the word, but more important. So it was like you couldn't just sort of like meet somebody, hang with them, take a couple snaps and go. It had to be a big deal. So I kind of stopped. And then I started photographing the stuff around my house. And I love toys. So
Hmm.
look at this little guy.
I know. It's just so much personality. But it's not the fact that what I like about the photograph is it's not necessarily the subject matter, it's the
Mhm.
way you photographed it, right? That so that's the
Right.
background, it's the fuzzed out, the
Right.
focal point to it. So I do want to ask when I came to this, I need to know about the equipment that you're using. Like what are you now photographing with?
Oh, now, which just makes me sad because now I'm realizing this was with my Hasselblad and probably a slightly wide angle lens and maybe a filter on top of it to blow him up bigger because I really liked soft focus.
Hmm.
I would never have been a member of the F64 club where everything's supposed to be perfect
Right.
crisp.
Was that the camera that you've always used?
That was, well, I started with a couple 35 millimeter cameras. Well, no, actually, I started my very first photo class. They loaned you a Yashica Mat box camera for the
Oh,
semester. So
okay.
my
All right.
first photos were done in square format, and that kind of locked in my head. But then for a long time, when I was doing portraits, I worked with a 35 millimeter camera. It was a lot easier, it was a lot faster. Um, and at some point, I wound up buying a used Hasselblad, and square format just always works for me. I really like the square.
Yeah.
So this was on a Hasselblad with, again, like magnifying filters to really blow out the background as much as possible. These days, I mean, I guess if I really wanted to, I could still work in film, but I'd have to buy it online. I'd have to send it somewhere to be developed. I'd have to, and I could still do that, but for the most part, for the last 5 or 6 years, I do everything on my iPhone,
Really.
and I
So is
feel weird.
this piece also on the Hasselblad?
This is still on the Hasselblad. This was a series I got to do about 10 years ago using some of the taxidermy collection from the Schuylkill Nature Center.
Fantastic.
And they were just so, the Schuylkill Nature Center people were so great about it. We eventually had a show there of, well, like 15 or so of the images, and they had somebody make little bird houses that when you open the doors, they made that it would play sounds of the birds that were in the exhibit. It was
Yeah,
so wonderful.
I
And they
remember
were
seeing
really
these.
great about letting me do this.
So you print your own works, correct?
Yes,
Okay. And so these are
up to a
digitally
certain
printed.
size.
Okay. And that so most of the time you're doing about what, foot square?
Yeah, this is probably 11 by 11. I have a gallery quality printer at home that will take up to a 13. Well, I was going to say 13 by 13, but it really is. You could do a roll if you
Yeah,
knew how to feed a roll into it, but
right.
13 inches wide. So most of the things I print at home myself. If somebody does want a larger print, I
Hmm.
have one or two places that do really high quality, again, archival level printing, and we'll go with that. But
Do,
this
do
little guy,
you, I'm sorry, do
yeah,
you edition these at all, or are the majority of your pieces just sort of one-offs?
I edition the fine art stuff. The
Okay,
portraits are open edition because it's not like I'm selling, hundreds of them.
right,
But the famous people stuff, it's like I can't really limit that. Otherwise, the prices I would have to set on those
right.
would be really high because it's like, well, there's only going to be 10 of them. So,
Do you
yeah,
do you have a standard edition size?
Um, it's been a while, but I think I do of this size, probably 25.
Okay.
And the larger they get, the smaller the edition becomes.
Yeah. Well,
The
I've seen
one
these in person, so I really like they're great on the screen, but when you see them in person, they have an extra quality about them that I really
right, now
enjoy.
this is one that was done on my phone.
Okay.
And I had a hard time, there were a couple years between, I mean, the digital revolution swept through so fast for photographers.
Mm-hmm.
I had a couple years where I really didn't take anything because I didn't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
just couldn't figure out, what am I gonna do? It's not the same. And then at some point, I started taking sort of like, just was like, I'm gonna have to accept it. Started taking photos on my phone,
Right.
downloaded a couple apps and went, oh, this isn't
Right.
so bad at
You
all.
know, every photographer I've talked to has gone through that
Hmm.
phase, and it's interesting to hear about. They all had that trepidation because they all love film so much. You know, is what
I
they've
sure do, yeah.
grown
I
up
mean, I
with.
still could, and I'm not saying I won't at some point.
Yeah.
And it's funny that when I used to, be a photo curator of a gallery down in Northern Liberties around 2003, 2004, and I felt like such a weakling because I just worked on film. Some of the people, we had somebody we got to show who made his own daguerreotypes
Uh-huh. Right.
with the chemicals and everything, and we had people who do platinum prints and all this wonderful stuff, and I was like, "Well, I work on film." You know? It was like,
Right.
yeah, big deal. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, so
But it's
I'm
the
not
eye that
saying I
you
wouldn't go
have that
back.
I really like. So I wanted to end on this
Oh,
one because I've
goodness.
seen these flower series that you have. And for me, it's all about light and lighting.
Yep.
So I don't know if that's what is running through your mind when you're setting this up, but so tell me what is going through your mind when you do
Well, this is again, like, for all the struggle I had with getting used to the phone has led me to doing all sorts of things that look like techniques that I would not have done with my camera, and
it?
like printing and film stuff. This is actually done with my phone. It was a pot of dwarf lotuses out of my front steps.
Hmm.
So this was a pot um, of these little, I mean, they're like water lilies, except these are lotuses, that the pot was maybe a foot across, and they grow these tiny versions of these things. And this flower was, oh, I'm gonna guess 2 inches, 3 inches across. And the leaf shape and the flowers themselves are so incredibly elegant that as soon as I converted it into black and white and started working with it a little bit, it was like, wow, this looks like something from the 30s.
So are you telling me that now that you're gone digital, you are finding new things, new tools, or
Absolutely. Which I never, the first couple of years of this, I would have just been like, "No, not gonna happen."
right?
But instead, and in particular, there's certain, one of the apps I use offers you things that look like C-plate film and things where I'm like, "Wow, I never would have made the effort,"
Yeah.
because that's serious commitment in the darkroom to doing these kind
It
of.
makes me curious to see what you're going to come up with over the next 10 years to
Well,
see kind of
yeah.
where your work is kind of going to
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
And
So
I
it's
think
given me a
that's
boost.
that's really why I wanted to talk with you today because I've seen the breadth of your work and I've seen so many changes. One of the questions I have is about before we begin other questions. Uh, you work in series
Mhm.
often, right? And I'm kind of
Yeah.
curious, do you work in one series at a time? Do you ever officially end a series? Would you ever go back?
Oh, that's a good question. Don't think I ever end a series, especially if you're talking about the flower stuff, because I ever since I was a little girl, I've loved flowers. But I will get sort of a bug, kind of like, say you went to a diner and you had the greatest cheeseburger ever, and for a while you just keep eating cheeseburgers for a while because you're like, God, that was really good. And then
Right.
one day you think, I could eat something else. So I will get a bug about some subject matter and
Uh-huh.
just keep doing variations on it. And one day I'm like, okay. I mean, early on in the digital stuff, I have a tintype ad. And I knew at some point I will stop taking things that look like daguerreotypes. But for a while I was like, boy, everything looks good like this. So, but I do flip back and forth. So you're right. I will go every once in a while. I run across a great creepy looking toy, and I think, there you go.
There you go. Bring him back in into the
Right, bring
fold.
him back in, and we'll do some more of this. So, but I
So
do have certain themes. Yeah.
I want to know about. your beginnings in art. And the question I've found really fascinating with a lot of artists is, do you have a memory of a maybe a first exposure to art, something that you still think about that sort of blew you away?
Hmm. I think, oh gosh, is this a Goya piece? The first time I can really remember a major art thing was my high school took a trip to the art museum.
Hmm.
And I believe the naked, is it Maya?
Oh
That
yeah. Uh-huh.
was the first thing that I remember. I must have been like 13 and just stood in front of it for a long time, just kind of going, wow.
That one's the got that got you, huh?
Right. That just, so it's funny that then you're some, 10 years later, I'm doing portraiture and trying to do without thinking, oh, I want to capture that. But there
Right.
was, because it wasn't just, it was the composition, it was the lighting, it was everything about his face that you just thought, I want to know more about this person.
So speed me up a little bit. At what
Okay.
point did you decide, yeah, I want to be an artist? Or is that something that you always knew?
No, no. And the funny story is at some point, my mom was really creative. And so I kind of felt like I might have a little something going on, but maybe I don't know. I don't draw well. And my high school had a our English teacher was also the head of the art club. And at some point I said I'd like to join the art club. And I was there for one afternoon and I did some drawings and she came over in a really sort of tactful way, said, "You're so good at academics. Maybe you should stick to that."
I've heard that again and again, and
Yeah, stick to
it
academics.
almost seems like it fuels the fire to I'll show you.
Right, I'll show you. And a couple years later, I was at Temple. I had gone there as a communications major, and I was dating somebody who took photos. And I kept looking at his photos and thinking, I like these. And at some point, I thought it switched from I like these to I think I could do that.
Yeah.
And then somebody mentioned to me, the journalism department, because I was a radio, television, film major. The journalism department has a class in the same building. They will loan you a camera for the semester and you can use their darkroom. And like 2 weeks into that class, that was it.
That was it. It was
That
all
was it.
downhill from there.
That was, yeah, well, yeah. So whatever else I might have chosen as a career path, just no
So
photos.
I want to know about your creative process. So do you have anything that sort of you use as a go-to that sparks your creativity? Like, I'll give you an example. Sometimes people will tell me, oh, for me, it's like reading or literature. Or other people will say, like, I got to take a walk or I do something. Is there something that gets you moving that sparks your creativity?
Hmm. It's funny just because I have longer dry as I've gotten older, longer dry spells than I used to. So there are
Hmm.
times when I think, well, that's it, I'm done. Clearly,
Okay.
I have nothing left to say. I'm just done. And then just Thursday, I got out of work and I work along the Parkway in Philly.
Huh.
And it just happened to be one of those really rare days in Philadelphia where it was a nice temperature, but also no humidity. The sky was so blue, and I just came out at just the right time for the sun hitting a number of things along the parkway in a way that, like, if I were lighting it myself, I'm like, well, that is exactly the perfect time. So I thought, well, take out your phone, let's see what you get. And I
Right.
photographed a couple things along the parkway, and there's one or two of them that I'm like, that was actually good. I'm happy with that.
So
So it's
is it
more,
nature or
well,
just
actually,
being
most
alive?
were buildings. Yeah, these
Okay.
are mostly buildings. So, so it more happens now that I'll just have a moment where I feel like I think of right after Christmas, I went up to visit a friend in New York and I was sitting in 30th Street Station waiting for the train. And there were some decorations and trees right next to that big angel s- statue. And it looked so beautiful. And I'm waiting for the train. And some part of me went like, hey, dope,
Right.
photographer, right? When you get your phone out. And I took some photos that are really beautiful. And in fact, one of them just got into Black and White magazine.
Oh, nice. Fantastic.
So it's weirder now. It's like every so often I'll just get the sense of like, oh, I think I'm
Like the
ready.
artistic tickle.
Right, and here it
Yeah.
comes. I think I should
Trademark.
just start doing stuff. So it's not as controllable as it used to be.
Have you ever photographed something and then maybe days, weeks, months later, you realize that you need to go back and do a reshoot? You ever do reshoot?
Oh, God, yeah.
Oh, really?
I
Okay.
do that a lot. The other thing that's really funny that happens is I will, in general, the first time I look at something I've shot, and this is from all the way back, my first look at it, I go, "Oh, these are all terrible.
Hmm.
These are all terrible. Oh, just terrible. Well, that one's maybe not so bad, but mostly these are terrible." And then I'll find the ones that I like, and I'm like, "Actually, they're not terrible." But then something like I recently was looking for some other portrait subject and came across um, Fred from the B-52s and went, "Oh, these are
Hmm.
actually pretty good." And worked them up and went, "Actually, these are pretty good." So it's funny that it's like uh, one of my teachers that I had years ago said the hardest thing for any artist to learn is when to stop.
Hmm.
So it's hard to I try and remember if I like something after I'm done with it. I think if you want to do it again,
Hmm.
go do something else, like leave it be. But I will occasionally rework. I mean, God, when I got the Tintype app, I put a lot of
That's your new thing. Am I
this
going to be seeing
Tintype.
that soon?
Like, wow, look, it looks like it's 1890. But yeah, I will I will definitely the water lotus photos, the dwarf lotus photos, I did them 2 summers in a row that every time I sat on my front steps and looked at them, I thought, "I think I could get something else out of
Yeah.
this."
Uh-huh.
And because there are times, and sometimes I'm right, where I look and I think, "Yeah, I could have done better."
So I've got a question for you that sometimes trips up artists.
Okay.
Looking at, thinking about your work as a whole, do you consider your works to be autobiographical in nature at all, or are
Hmm.
you always trying to make them separate from yourself?
Uh, I think they're all autobiographical. I think unless you are really doing well, I was gonna say unless you're doing a commissioned piece, but even then, there was a band I was sent to photograph back in the '80s that were so rude to me, and we were driving around with their manager. They were so rude. They were this hardcore band, and they had mohawks. They were really rude to me, and at some point, I suggested, because we were near there, "How about we hit one of these meat packing plant places?" And I photographed them with sides of beef, and my photo editor at the time looked at them later and went, "Wow, you really hated these guys, didn't you?" So I think even whether you wanted to or not,
Hmm.
you leak out into
Yeah,
what you're doing.
that's
So, yeah, I think every flower, every toy, at some point, it's like, "Yeah, I was saying something." Do I know what it was at the time? Probably
right.
not, but
Do you ever have any hopes of people who look at your work? Do you ever have any hopes that they walk away with something in particular, or is I mean, I know a lot of artists, they seem to even wash their hands of the viewer, like they
mm,
don't even think about them at
right.
all. But do you?
I think well, yeah. If it's the people, I really love that idea, and again, this wasn't me who had this idea, but I love the idea if they look at portraits where they think, "That's somebody interesting." Um, if it's flowers, I do really want them to stop and feel kind of like I do for a minute and think, "Wow, that is beautiful." And the toys and the roadside attractions, laugh, you know?
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
fun. These are
Yeah,
yeah.
get it.
So, yeah,
Uh,
I guess I would like some some back and forth between me and whoever's looking.
so, speaking of your audience, one of the questions I was kind of dying to ask you was we did talk about, where the scale of your works, right? So
Mhm.
the sort of like, I'm curious to know, like, if you had the capacity, would you ever consider printing like much larger?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Although it depends on what the subject was, because one of my favorite shows that we did at the gallery I worked at was Christmas one year, we did a small work show.
Hmm.
And I liked the challenge of how small can you go, and it's
Hmm.
still recognizably what it is and yours.
Right.
So and some things you were surprised that you printed like this big and went, "Wow, that still works."
Right.
And other things I would look at and think, "Oh, you wanna be like 30 inches across. You wanna be
Yeah.
a great big thing on the wall." You just do. but not everything does. But yeah, if somebody was going to fund me to doing a series of huge prints, oh
I would
God,
love to see that because
yeah,
I think
big.
that's the power of your images. There are some times when I've come across really large stuff and I know that if you scale it down, it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
interesting that you can start smaller and sort of work up. So we've got time for just one more question.
Okay.
Question I ask all artists. What
Okay.
does making art do for you?
Oh, such joy. Um, some years back, I was at a work team building seminary kind of thing, and they asked certain questions and you wrote them down, and then they read the answers. And one of the questions was, what makes you happiest? Every single person but me wrote friends and family, and I wrote taking a great photo. So when they got to mine, the whole room turns around and looks at me, and I was like, it is the thing that makes me happy.
Yeah, yeah,
Taking a wonderful image and looking at it and just being like, wow, I did that.
yeah. That's
Such a
great. Maybe you were
joy.
the only truthful one in the whole room. So
Well, either that or I have friends and family.
right.
And, just, but it was funny that it was absolutely
Yeah.
me and the whole rest of the room.
That's a perfect
Yeah.
answer to that. So Lisa, I really want to thank you for coming by today and talking with me about your work. I had
Oh, well,
such a
thanks for
joy
having me.
picking the works and talking to you. Always a pleasure. And I also want to thank everybody who tuned in to watch Art Show today. Sorry about that. We really appreciate your liking and subscribing Art Show. It really helps push us forward. If you have any questions for Lisa, just feel free to put them in the comments section. You know, if we can't answer them, we'll push them along and have Lisa respond back to you. Otherwise, thank you again for watching. And again, Lisa, thanks for spending some time with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Okay, bye bye.